it.
I think
You
I
can
did
do
it.
it all night long.
Here we go.
Yes, there we go.
And yeah. All right. So yeah, we're gonna wait a minute and see if
I'm seeing it live on my screen.
all
So that's
right.
good
All right.
news.
Here we go.
I see a lot of lightning
Yep.
on the left, and it just won't stop.
You get that little bit of energy before everybody starts wading in. By the way, I'd like you to know that it was because of the two of you. I knew I was doing a show with the two of you that I wore the shirt.
I love it. It's so good.
I do. I think it's awesome.
I was like, what D&D shirt should I wear tonight? Oh wait.
Yeah, bring it on.
Frey Lee, what's going on, Frey Lee?
All right. We got some of the Mad Chatters starting to pop in. We got Fraley here. Good to see you, sir.
Always love to see the Mad Chatters.
Let's send this live then.
Yeah, let's do
Without
it.
further ado.
That way we can find out if they can hear us.
I would hope they
I
can
said
hear us.
hi to Fraley, but only Theater Evie got the response.
Well, because I typed in the hi, so there's that.
That's what I'm saying.
So,
Ooh, I need to scooch this way a little bit.
scoosh
There you
a
go.
bit.
Scoosh.
It's in a box to your left.
Everything I own is in a box to the left.
So, hi guys. Long time no see.
Yeah, I know. It's like it's been a couple days.
Couple days and one really long drive.
Yeah, right. Mm.
True facts. Oh, dude,
So-
your drive sounds terrible.
Well, there was hello, Amanda. Good to see you.
Amanda.
Yay.
Oh, I have to show what is now next to my computer because I
Uh-huh.
need to see. This
There
is
he
now
is.
my new computer buddy. So
Amanda, you wanted to know where one of the other melons went? Well, there's one of your other melons.
there's a melon by my computer.
No
It
comment.
keeps me company.
Oh boy. So yeah. Well, hi everyone. Welcome to another edition of Loremaster Arcanum. I
Yeah.
am joined tonight by the amazing Theater Evie.
Yes.
And well, I don't know why I'm calling everybody knows your name, so Evelyn.
Yeah, that's me.
and Terry, otherwise known as Machic ED. Tonight we are going to be discussing Session Zeros and the important role they play in terms of TTRPGs and in terms of making sure that the game master and the players are both on the same page, as well as making sure that the game is there's a bit to be said about making it a safe space as well. So
Exactly. Mhm.
I have a question for you because I have, you have an idea of how long I've been playing. How long have you been using session zeros in your game? And Ellen, why don't we start with you?
Well, I know that when my very first game that I ever played in Session Zero was not a thing that happened. That was when that would have been 2004. But ever since I've been playing with John, we've always had session zeros for our stuff, at least in some form. Yeah, I think they're just really important to kind of lay out in general what everything is going to happen, make sure that your players are comfortable, make sure the DM's comfortable. So yeah.
Terry, how about you?
So I prior to DMing my first game, because I'm the youngin' here when it comes to experience. I started playing just 5-ish years ago. But the first game I DM'd was Extinction Curse. And from then, prior to actually starting DMing Extinction Curse, I did research on session zeros. And so every one of my games has had a session zero with a list of questions that I go through, and I will continue to do that for every game I DM moving forward.
Cool. So yeah, I will admit that for the longest time, session zero, I didn't know. I don't know that I really honestly knew what a session zero was until possibly really the pandemic, because I Didn't spend a lot of time in the TTRPG space on Twitter. I didn't spend any time on Twitter at all, to be honest with you. So all the games I were playing with people I've known for 30 years, and well, that wasn't a thing back then. And so now it's me. It's something I've implemented for games, especially when I'm with new players. I even attempt to do just a touch of it for one shots, but for the most part, and that's just really one piece of it I'll get to in a moment, but mostly for any campaign purposes. I've got stuff coming up that I absolutely plan on doing a session 0. So for session 0, and let's go in a bit of reverse order. Well, sort of reverse order here. Terry, for session 0, what do you incorporate into your session 0s?
So as not to dominate the time, I actually, the research that I did, I ended up on Reddit, and Haze Zero, Reddit name, had a wonderful session 0 topic listing guide. And I actually now use it for all of my session 0s. And really, that guide ranges from game mechanics, things like earning XP and leveling up or milestones, to player behavior, game behavior. It goes into rule sets. It goes into the DM, how I'm working, ethic concerns and topics. It goes into character creation. Like literally everything you can think of is in this. Now I've modified it slightly for my groups because this was created specifically for D&D 5e, and everything I tend to DM is Pathfinder 2e, but there's enough in it that I use it for everything. General mechanic rules, inspiration, crits, how I treat crits. I mean, literally anything you can think of that someone might question about, it covers. And I feel like it has made DMing easier because they understand from the get-go where I plan on going.
So from a rule standpoint, you mentioned things like crits. Are you using it for stuff that is already in the rule set as well as like your homebrew stuff? Or house rules, I should say, more than homebrew?
That's a great question. Yes. And so a good example, so in PF2E, how crits work is a bit different than how crits work, for example, in D&D, or, if you're getting into things like any of the other TTRPGs in there. And so I go over what is raw, rules as written. And then if there are any minor adjustments to those raws, I go over it specifically in the session 0. So it's not a surprise to them if they've played in the games before. They're not coming in and going, oh, I didn't know that was how you did it. I want them to know beforehand so that there are no surprises, so they can just go with the flow.
Excellent. Evelyn, how about you?
Yeah, so I mean, like the most important things, you kind of covered already, but you sit down and you have initial discussions about kind of what you're looking for what you are looking forward to tell, the story you're looking forward to tell as the DM, what the players are looking for out of that story, to make sure that you're all on the same page initially, just with themes and the topics that you're going to be playing in. Make sure that everybody is comfortable with those things. Discussions of in role play, where are certain people's lines of comfort, where that ends, and the types of role play they want to engage in, because consent is a very important thing at the table, and you want to make sure everyone's having a good time and people not crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed, and of course going over whatever rule system you might be using, the overall addition, and then of course always going over whatever house rules that you have, and kind of in the case of my stuff, once my campaign actually starts, it'll be going over general history of the world so that they understand their place in that world, and can better establish the connections to that world and as we're going through it. So those are kind of the most important things that I look at for that sort of thing.
Awesome. You mentioned as far as the rules and some, I've heard the term lines and veils used. One of the things that I personally I like to do, because for me, I plan to incorporate into session 0, but there is something that I found. Someone showed me this, and I've been using it for even like short form campaigns or one shots with like brand new people who I don't know at all, especially is from Monty Cook Gaming. There is, and this is, it is free to download. There are 2 PDFs, I believe. One is the actual form. One I believe explains the form a bit. And basically, you can give it to all the players. They can put down what, where their lines are. It goes through like a whole list of things that they can basically put. Green, they're fine with. Red, absolutely not. And then yellow, there's a line somewhere, and that's the kind of thing where I can discuss it with them later. Just if they're not sure, we can discuss and figure out what we want to do in terms of that line. And not only that, during the session 0, how do we handle it if we do hit that line and go past it? How do we want to handle that? Because obviously you don't want people to be uncomfortable, and there are people who, me personally, I've been playing, and played at a time when there were no rules. There were in terms of a lot of the stuff. So for me, it really, honestly, as long as it's not an absolutely horrific taste, I'm okay. But obviously there are people who they had, there are things that are triggering, and it's not always the things, sometimes it's the things you don't expect, or things that you might not think of if you don't have it, like fear of spiders. Spiders can be a big part of the game, and it's if you're not prepared for it, and somebody is just suddenly not, their entire demeanor changes. Well, yeah, but you want to try to find things like that out ahead of time. So I use that as a tool. Perry, did you mentioned this checklist? Is there a website or somewhere that people can go to?
Let me see if I can find the link. I'm going to ask you a question while I'm looking for this, though.
Sure.
With this checklist, I love the checklist. I think it's phenomenal. Here's my question for you. Would this be better as an interview piece before a checklist? And the reason I asked that, a good example, right? You've got spiders in here, right? Mm-hmm. Which they can be very traumatizing depending on the person. Totally understand that. In Pathfinder 2E, there are adventure paths that have a lot of spiders. In fact, I'm currently dealing with mud lurkers and their pet spiders currently. Should you do something like this prior to creating your group? Essentially interviews, and we're talking less so of friends, right? Because generally speaking, if you've got friends, the hope is you have a fairly good understanding of your friends. But if you're creating a group that may have people who are not necessarily close to you, might this be something you do prior to putting the group together?
That's an excellent question. Hadn't honestly given that a heck of a lot of thought, but it does make sense. Yeah, and it's one of those things where I'm glad these tools exist, because honestly, as someone who doesn't really have any major phobias, or at least nothing, right? It's the kind of thing where I wouldn't even, some of these things I wouldn't even think. It would never occur to me that someone, just a description of a spider could set someone off. Right. So yeah, that's a great point.
And I bring that up because I'm going to use my daughter as an example, and she despises spiders with a passion. I don't know why, because I love them. I think they're adorbs. But she could very much, the idea of a spider in a campaign could very much affect her playability in it. And that might affect, for example, the adventure path or the adventure that I plan on running. And so knowing that before the group is created and before the campaign is set might be something that might be necessary.
Yeah, that's an absolutely fantastic point. So I guess the question I have is, and here's where I run, and as as it's almost seemingly obvious as that is, I guess the question I have is, how far can you go? How far can you go with it? Because can you really account for? I mean, do you ask everybody what their list of phobias is? Is that too personal? Um, I'm not entirely sure where the line is, both from an etiquette standpoint, in terms of asking personal information, overly personal information of somebody, versus taking it. Basically, you're hoping for the best and hope that it's on the checklist. If it's not on the checklist, now
Well,
I
and I
also
think
go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, I think what's one of the things that helps with that sort of stuff, like having your players, be able to share those things that might be an issue for them, is to make them comfortable and understand that the table is a place where they can share that without worry of being belittled or criticized for having certain things that they can't feel comfortable with at the table. So making that a comfortable place where that they feel welcomed and open to share those things makes it a little easier for that to be shared from the get-go without necessarily having to like dig into that and ask them, oh, is it this, whereas they can feel like they can say, okay, well, this I noticed you mentioned here, well, this might not be on the checklist, but I also have this, for example.
So I guess the other question I have, and this goes a little bit beyond session 0, but because we're on the topic, let's run with it. What do you do? How do you handle it normally in your game when you accidentally hit a line, and it could have been a line that a person may not even realize they had. Has actually, I guess, has it come up? And if it has not, how would you? How do you think you would probably handle that?
I mean, I've seen it come up in a game before,
Mm-hmm.
and the best way that it was handled, because this was not me running the table, but I think it was handled very well, was just the DM calling a break and letting everyone kind of step away so that they could speak to the player, find out kind of where they were at, giving everybody a moment to kind of decompress, and then figuring out where to go from there. Not really drawing a lot of attention to it, taking that person so that they were able to process what they needed to process, and not make it a big scene, basically, because it's bad enough when you're in a situation where you're very anxious or anything, and then have everybody stare at you while you're being anxious, and so being able to take kind of a step away, figure it out, reprocess, figure out what was this, the thing that set them off, and then, come back and kind of bypass that or change direction. And it's easy enough narratively to just say, okay, we have moved on from this, or whatever. So that way, that isn't a continuing issue, and, take note of that, and, keep that in mind for the future.
Great. I want to bring up two things that were mentioned in the chat. Vivi. Hi, Vivi. Yes, we miss you two very, very, very much. Can't wait for next year because it's not here soon enough. But you said be aware and avoid if possible. If it is a trigger that they were unaware of, being comfortable enough as a group and DM to understand and be able to communicate that. And that's absolutely true. It's making sure that, as a DM, you're not doing anything to make it matters worse. Being understanding, and they don't need to explain themselves. The player does not need to explain themselves. If it's a trigger, it's a trigger. Just figure out how you want to handle it in terms of games. Do you need a break? Do you need a long break? And can we reset, rewind a bit, maybe take a little break so the DM can figure out what they're going to do, to get past that particular section. And then Necromantic DM, hi Mike, said the checklist, if kept private, would allow the DM to state what will be avoided without singling out any players, and that is very important. The consent and gaming form that I posted, the link that I posted, no player sees any of the other players' forms. No player knows what the other players have chosen. If there are any reds, and I mean, there's some reds that I'm not even going to go through because they're just they're the kind of things that are normally touched beyond the pale anyway. But some of the things like maybe spiders or something like that, I will specifically say, there'll be no spiders, there'll be no this, that, and, not going to mention who it was. Never go through that, just because you don't want to be singling out players. You don't want anybody feeling uncomfortable. It's really, honestly, it's not anyone else's business.
And I want to add on to this a little bit, only because players also have to understand that if there are lots of things they're not comfortable with, then that table may not be for them. Because we have to also remember that the DM should get enjoyment from what they're playing as well, right? And I don't mean, hopefully the GM does not get enjoyment out of racism and homophobia, etc., right? Because if they do, that
a bigger problem.
I don't want to be at that table, okay?
Yeah, no.
But a good example is blood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Blood can be a trigger for people. I totally understand that. At the same point, and we've seen me in our games, the pain bow, for example, I will describe my killing blows, Taldar or Shorewin, etc. That does include blood. And there is not an enjoyment of blood. Okay, that's going to come out the wrong way. But with the way I tell a story, that is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And so understand that some tables are good for some people and other tables are good for other people. And don't be afraid to say, this table is not my table. Whether you're the DM or whether you are the player, understand that sometimes the way a table is set up is not going to be the table that you should be a part of. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with not being a part of a table that just doesn't fit your aesthetic.
And sometimes it's not even, sometimes it can be the actual game. You can have the same exact table, the same exact people. It may be a different type of campaign. It may be a different game, a game altogether where it's just not going to be for the particular person. And yeah, you're right. There's nothing wrong with it. There's not, that's not saying that you should never play with these people, or that person should never be welcome at the table. It's making sure that you're playing, everyone is playing at a table that they're comfortable with. They're comfortable with the game, how the game is being run, how the game is being played. Actually, before we go on, Evelyn, did you have anything that you'd like to add on to that? So I have a question. Well, Terry, actually, let's go to Evelyn first. For session 0, would you run your session 0s differently for an online game versus a in-person game? And if so, what would be some of the differences?
Yeah. So, I mean, you kind of have to run it a little differently when you're talking about online versus in person. Typically, session 0 in person, we'd probably have some snacks, some food, sit around, be able to kind of have books laid out and discuss a little more freeform, what everybody's looking at doing it. And I don't know, it's a little more of a relaxed setting, it feels like to me, in person session zeros versus online, where it's a little more structured, I think. Because you know, a lot of times when you're doing stuff online, people have a certain amount of time that they can meet for, and that's about it. You know, and I feel like with online too, you kind of have to be a little more prepared going into it, as far as like players as well as the DM needs to be a little more prepared to, like, this is what we're talking about. These are my, you know, this is what, you know, is going down. Let me see what, you know, let's talk about what you have in mind. So people tend to bring their notes to the table more for online session zeros. So I think that's the biggest difference, is the format tends to be a little more structured versus relaxed. I mean, and in person, you still, as a DM, you still have the things that you know, your notes about what you want to discuss and go over, all the content and topics and stuff, but it just tends to be, you know, a little more less structured, I suppose, in my experience, at least.
Terry, how about you?
Because I use the same checklist for both in person and online, it tends to run the same way for me. Yeah, generally my in person are friends. Like my current campaign are three other faculty members and then Evelyn, and so it's very much a you know, kind of a relaxed setting. But I still go through my checklist one by one, and even if we start a new campaign with the same players, I'll still go through the checklist, because you never know what might change in their life that might change their view on things, which I did link that in chat earlier for those that are interested. And then online, same sort of thing. Now, what I found and what I'm learning is when doing my checklist online with players that are not necessarily either acquaintances or friends, I need to go even deeper. And I learned that lesson with my last campaign, which fell apart because I had not gone deep enough with my session zero. And that's a wonderful learning opportunity for me. But I just, when it's not somebody that you are a regular with, I feel like you need to even get deeper to make sure that that understanding is there so that things don't fall apart.
I completely agree with that. I mean, it's every DM. I think in, you know, every DM's fear is, among other things, one, that they're just that your players are just not enjoying themselves, but even worse when you're pretty sure that you have a good adventure, but there's something that, you know, either it's just the group is not the right group for the adventure. You know, they're not for whatever reason, whether it's there's just something that in the styles that's just not working. You know, you get to a certain point and you realize that this just isn't working, and you've gone through however many sessions, and suddenly you're back to square one, and the age old thing of one finding a party and starting over again. Yeah, I oof, that's definitely rough. You know, I was thinking about this because I haven't had an opportunity to do a session zero for an in person game yet. Again, because my in person campaign, there was only one new, you know, there was only one new player, somebody I hadn't played with in years, or for years at a time, and I already had, you know, I had a personal connection, so I already knew most of the things that they didn't like, and I was going to, you know, I would know very quickly if there was something that was wrong. But I'm curious. Do you ever roll? Do you have for session zero, especially in person? Maybe not so much online, but roll up your characters during a session zero.
Good question.
And in-person session zero, absolutely. Yeah. That is often actually where we do roll up characters, you know, because you have everybody in the same place, you can do all of that. And then that way, we have time in between the session 0 and session 1 for people to work on their backstories and the DM to finish doing whatever prep that they need to do. But yeah, it gives everybody a chance to kind of talk and get to know each other and kind of figure out what the party composition is going to look like and get that, because that's a great place to do that at.
And this is where Evelyn and I differ because I want my players to choose their characters ahead of session 0.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the session 0, talk about, because a lot of times in mine, based on the adventure paths, they know each other in some way. And then once they know their character, then they can develop the relationships between their characters in the session 0. And neither way is better than the other. It's just, as DMs, each of us are going to have our different ways of creating the camaraderie between the players, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for Evelyn, she's got her way that works very well for her, and for me, I've got my way. But and for me, I don't want to inhibit a player from choosing something that they really want to do based on what other people are doing. We're currently putting together a group right now, and 2 of my players already know exactly who they are, ancestry and class wise. And I've let the other 2 players start to know about that. But I also tell them, don't let that affect your decisions. Now, part of that is easy in Pathfinder 2E because of how it works, and you don't have to have a healer and all sorts of things. But I don't want somebody to play a character just because it's optimal. I want them to play a character because they love their character.
Sure, absolutely. It's funny. I was thinking about my own answer to that question, and I realized that my answer is it depends. So if I had a game where everybody was very local to me, I would definitely have a session 0 where we rolled up characters, because it's not as much of a burden, and it helps get that camaraderie going. It builds that initial excitement. Oh, what you get? What's your rolls? How are you looking over there? And also, it's one of those times where I'm okay with the metagaming. All right, so what equipment are you getting? You've got gold. What equipment are you buying? This, that. Fine. Yep, let them go. For the problem I have right now is my current game, when it was in person, was once every 3 months or so, and we'd have a 12 all day, basically an all day session. We'd get to wherever we were playing at like 9-10 in the morning. We'd have a little breakfast, and then we'd break for lunch, and then we'd basically play until dinner, and we might eat while we're still playing just so we get more playtime in, because we knew it was going to be another 3 months. I couldn't spend 2 hours 2 or 3 hours rolling up characters, because it's just not efficient use of everyone's time. Which also, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, and that in a lot of it comes down to individual groups and what works best for the groups. And I think it's as people are watching, understand there is no right or wrong answers to what we're saying. There are different ways of going about it, and you may do one thing with one group and something else with a different group, and that may work totally perfect.
So, and actually, well, first I want to acknowledge the fact that Overcord, great name, had first time chat from viewer, great list, but increasingly see people reproach questions from new DMs, saying that everything should have been covered in session 0, and if something goes wrong, it all comes back to that. First of all, reproaching a new DM is a terrible thing to do, because, as the saying goes, there's never enough DMs. Sometimes things just don't work out after a little while, even if people agree in principle. Absolutely true. I mean, you can all have an agreement, and things, for whatever reason, the vibe is just not there. There's just something not clicking. It could be the story. It could be everybody. The point that everybody is into life. Everybody's got real life stuff going on, and it affects your mood. And you just realize this is not going well. Going up, let's see who else we have. All right. Necromantic DM says I prefer it. I'm assuming what I prefer it is rolling during the session 0. The players can discuss what they're playing with each other as well. However, most of the characters show up with the characters already built. Okay. Pat66 allows group discussion about matters and expectations for everyone in the group, along with character discussion and background creation. Very, very true. Necromantic DM brings up another interesting one. I make a handout with information most of the time. So, time was, we were playing D&D and we'd have a session, the first time there wasn't really a heck of a lot of ways to communicate with them back then. We weren't calling each other on phones because that cost money. They weren't a local exchange. Yes, no. I am not going to spend an hour talking to you at 20 cents a minute. No. So now, I mean, we have Discord, we've got email, we've got this and that. I do find myself, even if I was planning on having a legit session 0, there's going to be something ahead of time. It may be just what to bring to the session 0, or what they are going to need for session 0, but most likely it's going to have the story hook. This is the setting. This is the general, story thing, and then we'll go through more of the specifics so they can have questions ready. We'll go through more of the specifics at the session 0. But I want to get them ahead of time, get that energy going, get them looking forward to it. So I'm not doing this big lore dump on them there because, let's face it, we get excited about our lore, and the players are never quite as excited as we are unless they're extremely invested in that world already. If they are, that's awesome. And you are so entirely incredibly lucky. Me, I have to kind of like spoon feed them. Get them liking lore without even realizing that they're liking the lore.
So Necromantic asked, anyone have any ideas on how to deal with players bringing in already made characters to session 0 before they even know the setting or campaign story? And I'll tell you right now, I tell my players as soon as I know they are my player what we're doing. And again, this is easy with PF2E Adventure Pass because they have a player's guide, and you can ask anybody that's already part of my upcoming campaign. I literally linked them. The player guide was the first thing they got, so that they knew exactly the setting, where we are in Galarian, what the general story is, what you should think about doing with your character. And I think as a DM, even whether it's homebrew or whether it's a pre-planned campaign, you should do that. Give them as much. And my DM, when I first started, I was playing 5e, and my DM gave us essentially a notebook of PDF that gave us as much information about the world, etc., so that we knew what we were going into, and generally gave us an idea of what types of characters to play. And I think that comes down to the DM being proactive rather than reactive.
Evelyn? Anything? Okay.
I was going to say, I don't really have anything to add to that.
Okay. Yeah, so with me, it's more of... And kind of like Terry, there's an idea of what we're going to be playing. What I will tell them is, I'll tell them really briefly the setting. Now, of course, 9 out of 10 times it's going to be the world of Greyhawk. But if I'm doing a 5e campaign, there are concessions to the fact that I'm playing a 5e game in a 1e in a setting that was built for 1e and basically went up through 3e. So there are things that don't, really were not in the lore of the setting. But so what I'll do is I'll figure out what it is I'm okay with, and I'll tell them, I'll give them the list of like the extra, like Dragonborn. I've got Dragonborn. I've got in the lore. I've got my own personal lore for it where I bring Dragonborn. So you want to play Dragonborn? Go right ahead. As far as classes go, I mean, I'm okay pretty much on the class list. I'll make them all work. The only things that concerns me occasionally is when we get later into, with 5e, as you got later into it, there were just subclasses that were broken. And I don't want to be dealing with... Now, most of my players are not power gamers. My regular players are not power gamers anyway, so I don't have to worry about too much, but I have enough hard time with them, especially when they get to higher level, just dealing with standard subclasses. Now, I mean, if they were given some of the newer ones some of them that are quite a bit OP, I'd be lost, because it's just, this is, as a DM, it's not fun anymore. I'm trying, I have to plan against their class versus just plan a session.
See, I think this is where it goes back to DMing is not a job, it's for fun. And if your players are going to play that way and it's not something you want, then you don't play with those. I hate to say it, you don't play with those players, even if they're friends. I think you have, and I follow a bunch of Reddits that deal with DMing, and one of the things a lot of people talk about is the DM is a player too. So if the DM is not enjoying their time, there is no reason to continue doing what you're doing.
Agreed.
And so, I mean, Robert, you know me, and Evelyn does. I'm an RPer at heart. I could do 10 sessions in a row where there's no combat if I get to RP for 10 sessions in a row. But I understand encounters. I understand all these other parts. And so as long as there's a mix for me, I'm happy about it. But if there's a power gamer in my group, somebody whose focus is literally just becoming now it's much harder to do in Pathfinder 2e, but I'm going to tell you, and John will eventually watch this. I created Taldar to be the most OP character I could. He was made to be OP because of certain things that happened before then. And I built him that way. And the RP for him came afterwards. And I found that I don't like playing that way. It's not nearly as fun as my RP love. But we have to understand the DMs have to enjoy it too. And if the DMs aren't enjoying it, if the DMs aren't, if it's not fun for them, then the DM has the right to decide that maybe this group isn't mine.
Yeah, and the interesting thing I haven't had a problem with, my players really haven't given me any brushback in terms of like things that I've blocked out. They're usually pretty okay with that, because I give them a pretty wide berth, reasonably wide berth. I don't try to clamp down too hard on things. And again, most of the campaigns that I had started before all the extra books came out anyway, so they weren't really, I didn't have to deal with a lot of that. I think Xanathar's might have been the one book that was out. The conundrum I'm going to have soon is I'm going to be ending my 2-year campaign soon, and I'm going to have to try to see if I can convince them all to play Castles and Crusades, because I'm just enjoying it too much, and it's like I'd like to have a game that goes further. I'll still, if they want to play 5e, I can run a 5e campaign. I'm fine with it, but I may wait till Spelljammer comes out, because then we can listen. They can let their do whatever, however they want. Orcs in space. That's all I'm saying.
But that's it. If you want to do Castles and Crusade, you just say, look, the players will have a more enjoyable time if I'm enjoying myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, the part of it with us, there's also the aspect of it, the fact that the players I'm playing with are friends of mine from, who we're all spread out. We don't get to see each other much. So this is our get together time. So as much as I'd rather we play CNC, I'll play 5e over nothing. And I'm happy to do so. It's not quite as big a deal as I might have made it sound, but it'd be really cool if I could get them to all go along.
I mean, that's what I did. My group was a 5e group, and our DM said he had a kid and was finishing grad school, and he just couldn't do anything. I said, look, I'll DM, but we're playing Pathfinder 2e. And they were all like, okay, if it means we get to play and hang out, then we're kosher with it.
Exactly. So we mentioned, okay, here's the other, we mentioned character creation. So, if you're creating characters there, I'm assuming that you're also handling the backstories during the session 0, or are you doing the backstories after the fact? Like between
That's
session
an
0 and
Evelyn
session 1?
question.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say it's a good place to kind of, I mean, if you have ideas for your backstory, that's a good time to discuss that a little bit. But I think for me, getting the characters rolled up and then giving them the opportunity to create their backstories in full between session 0 and session 1 kind of gives the DM a chance to let them kind of flex their creative muscles, as well as especially after hearing kind of what the content of the world is and kind of what the expectations and the themes and that sort of thing are, so that they have a better grasp of what they're going into when they're creating that. As well as it also gives, now that you've had that, the conversation, and they can have time to get their backstory, then they can get it to you before session 1, and you can have time to kind of start kind of grabbing those story hooks out, finding those nice juicy plot holes in their backstory that you can totally exploit and make them cry sad tears, and just find cool things, so ways to weave their stories into the story to make them, once they've completely forgotten about their backstory, come back to you and be like, oh gosh, I forgot I did that, and just have fun with it. And so yeah, I think that is kind of the point that works best for me as a DM, at least.
Hey, you mentioned the the tiers of the with the backstory. It's one of those things where I kind of struggle with the timing of it, because I mentioned, I think I've mentioned this I know I've mentioned it previously to some people anyway, that I like having the overall story and then the personal story arcs, and there's that thing between the session 1 session, or session 0 and session 1, or maybe even session 0 if the person has an idea of what they want their backstory to be anyway. I want to know, and this is actually a good fodder for session 0 if they have that backstory idea, is, okay, what am I allowed to do with your backstory as a DM? Because, who can I kill off? Or can I kill anyone off? Or is that going to be something that's just, going to be traumatized? What, because I think, and it's one of those things where it gets kind of thrown out. It's like, the backstory is basically just, the fear the DM's just going to wreck wreck everything in your backstory for fun and pleasure.
So here's my thing, though, right? Okay. As a DM, that shouldn't be our goal.
Wait, which part?
Wrecking somebody's backstory for the funsies.
I that was a bit tongue in cheek.
Well, it's tongue in cheek, but there are people out there who could very well do that, and I think a good DM, and this could be a whole nother topic about what makes a good versus bad DM, right? But a good DM tries to tell a story that's engaging for the players and allows the players to have an effect on the world and their group as a whole. And so I'm going to use John's example of Shorewin here, which I think he did really, really well with Shorewin's sister, where that character, that NPC, became pretty integral to what was happening with the red dragon and the orcs and everything else in the mountains there, and allowed both Shorewind's story to grow and the story of the group to move forward. I think as a good DM, your goal when looking at somebody's backstory is to find a way to make it fit into the overall campaign that you've created, or if you have a specific adventure that's already been built, how do you incorporate that in and make it just as important to the players as what they're trying to achieve with the general BBEG?
A great point. I'll go even a step further. How do you making it as important to the other players as it is to the person, whose backstory it is?
I think that's a combination of both the DM and the player themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I made Githa important.
Mm-hmm.
Important enough that the other players were willing to go look for her one more time when John wanted us to go the other direction. And I think this is where the collaboration comes in, where the players and the DM, when there's a respect and an understanding, work together to create that importance. Suddenly backstory, a Millie's bolt, right? Understanding what that bolt was so important. I know she's dead too soon.
I have my bolt around here somewhere. I'll put it down.
Here, I'll show you mine, since I always have mine right next to my screen.
I was wearing mine. I was wearing mine around yesterday all day.
Oh, we should have worn them at BBCon. But that's exactly it. When the DM and the players combine to make the backstory important, that's when it's phenomenal.
Great point. Evelyn? I don't want to do the John thing where I keep throwing things to you and did you have anything that you wanted to add to that, or?
No, I agree. Like, I think that, and one of the things that I'm going to brag on John a little bit more too, but one of the things that he's really good at is giving everybody's backstory some time to shine too. Mm-hmm. A good example recently in Rune Lords is there was a big arc for Thomas's character Alcott, dealing with his family and the things how his family was tied to how John worked that into the existing story of Rise of the Rune Lords. And he did the same thing with Irda in a lot of places too. I actually found out something very significant very early on when I first started playing, and then he has woven other parts of Irda's story into that as well. So, I think that's another thing that's, not only is it important to me as a character because those moments were things that I wrote about and created that were significant to my character, but he tied it to the story so that it became an important part for everybody. Mm-hmm. And I think a good DM does that, utilizes those things and finds a way to work it into their story so that each player has a chance to at least have a little bit of that time to shine within the context, so that they get to explore the things that they wrote about and to share their stories with these people that they play with every week, because they're our friends and we want to share our stories with each other. That's why we play D&D to begin with. It is collaborative storytelling, and being able to share our stories and experience them together, it makes it much more engaging and just a better experience overall. I think it teaches me a lot about the other people I'm playing with. It teaches me about my players as a DM. It teaches me about my DM as a player, and the things that they grab onto and what they find important, which is most of the time is to tell a great story and to give those players the moment to shine and live in that.
That you bring up, you actually made me think of something that I hadn't thought about in a while. Talking about backstories and building backstories, and it's something that I've realized that I need to be cognizant of when I'm working with players on their backstories, as far as like fitting them in and hearing what it is they want. Actually, and this is something from a session 0 that I tried to pull. I want to know what the players want for their character. not not are they trying to get the biggest sword they can, the most magical sword they can, blah blah blah. Generally speaking, where do they, what kind of growth do they want for their characters? Because I ran into, because one of the things two things. One, I've run into issues where the character, I don't know what to do for them next because I haven't been given enough information, and I'm kind of like just guessing and hoping that what I'm throwing at them is interesting to them. But from another part is making sure that the backstories and what their goals are don't clash. And I say this because I was in a campaign a while back, it was probably about 8 months ago, where my character's backstory, there was a little confusion at one thing. The DM and I had a bit of a miscommunication as to something that I thought was important, and turned out it wasn't in terms of my character, which was kind of upsetting a little bit. But we tried to get past that. But the problem we ran into is we were working on another character's, something that was important to another character, but my character's backstory kind of made it so that he was going to be very impatient about what he was supposed to be doing, and it kind of felt like the character got lost for a while, and it just kind of like ruined my taste for the game. So I don't know if either of you've run into any of that where you've had to figure out how to make them all work so that give the player, give them a time to shine, but it's not running contrary to what somebody else is trying to accomplish as well. Yes, no, maybe?
I'll let Evelyn go first. Okay, then I'll go second. But you're right. That is tough. And I think when those situations arise, I think discussions have to happen outside of the game to figure out the best way to proceed. Again, this comes from somebody who, because role play is so important to me, backstories are so important to me. And I love nice, intricate backstories. I mean, I can work with simple backstories. Don't get me wrong. Some players, backstory is not their thing. Totally understand. But you have to be able to find time for backstories to mesh with each other. You have to find a time on how to make sure that everybody's backstory is getting the time that's due to them. And you have to understand that, and if you have questions about backstory, you need to talk to your players and make sure that you understand what's important and what's not important to the player. Because you don't want, especially, and I'm going to use GHA as a good example, because all of us tend to go very deep into our backstories. I don't think there's anybody in the group. I mean, don't get me wrong. We sometimes wait a few sessions to see if John's going to kill our players first.
A session.
But I mean, you've seen, I've released Taldar's backstory. Evelyn, I believe you released Moira's backstory. We go pretty in depth in our backstories. And so we view our backstories as very, very important. And if the DM doesn't take the same belief of the backstories, it can be super frustrating.
Sure. I did have multiple conversations, and they were good conversations, and it got to the point where I just realized that there wasn't a way back. So unfortunately I ended up leaving that game.
And again, that goes back to some tables are good for you and some tables aren't.
Actually, I did want to get to some, because chat is on fire.
I know, right?
Great points. So, okay, Necromantic Demo, I always put plot hooks in my backstory for my DM to use. At least that way I get to pick what they use against me instead of finding out I had close siblings I didn't know about. Okay. That's Overcore. Does anyone else, I like this question, does anyone else split up in shallow and deep backstory. For me, the shallow one is the one everyone around the table will know early on right away, and the deeper one is hooks for DM and character develop as part of the campaign. Overcord, I'm going to take this one first, and I'm going to say absolutely. There is the backstory. There's the basically the initial setup, which in itself is there's a little bit of a backstory there, just how when we describe how they all got together and such. But my campaigns, I think of in terms of acts. There's Act 1, Act 2, and if all is going well, Act 3, where there are things that are happening because of the fact that I run a very, very sandbox campaign. I'm throwing things at them that may not have absolutely no significance now, but if they're paying attention, it's going to come up later. And it's great when you have that one person who's writing notes, because there's nothing better than when you do that callback and they're like, well, that didn't happen. And you point to the person with the notes, please go back and look. And sure enough, it's there. Oh, it's such a good feeling as a DM. But yeah, it's planting those seeds, and basically sometimes the backstory evolves just on what the players give me. Or the how I work with their backstory based on what they give me, what they decide to do. Like I said, running a sandbox, I'm sometimes beholden to the players to figure out where they're going next, and figuring out, well, what can I do with their backstory from there and bring it toward into the future parts of the campaign. Evelyn, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I
It's
thought
okay.
I unmuted myself. There we go. I think as far as like backstories go, I'll work with whatever I'm given. Some players will write a lot, some players will write a little. But whatever it happens to be, you can work with it. And I think that, just kind of back to session 0, like kind of having them understand what you might be looking for, and explain like how you will use that backstory too, especially with new players that haven't played before. You ask them to write a backstory and they're like, why do I need to have it, and you just explain to them, this is what I utilize this for, it's going to be part of the story, that sort of thing. So and I, like I said, I can work. I love a long backstory. I love lots of plot hooks. Give me all the information about it, because I personally like writing really long backstories because it helps me develop my characters. So when a player puts that much effort into it on coming into it, it's also really exciting to me. But yeah, I mean, it's what you're comfortable with, and I always want to make sure my players know that I'm not going to expect something beyond their level of comfort. I want them to have a good time, and to know that whatever they do provide me, I can find a way to use it.
Terry.
She's way nicer than me. Let me rephrase that.
Well, okay, I'm going to go with she is way nicer than you, but
okay,
way not way, but
my feeling is, I want you to know your character. I want you to know where a character came from and why they are here. Because if you know, then I can do things that will extend the enjoyment of you playing that character. If you come to me and say, I built my character just a pew pew, I'm going to be like, okay, there's not much I can do to further your enjoyment when it comes to the story. I mean, I can put monsters up there and you can pew pew them. But my feeling is that even and I'll use some of my current in-person players that I have. They don't necessarily have a huge extensive story. I've got one who's a champion who likes to sew clothes. Champion being similar to Paladin on D&D. And she's a gnoll. Her character is male, but the player, she's a gnoll. And So every time we fight something, she tries to pick up pieces of whatever she's killed and or items in the area. So at one point, a room was filled with spider webs, and she just wanted to take some of the silk and save it for thread. What she doesn't know is I'm building that into something moving forward that's going to be part of her character's story. And Evelyn won't say anything about it since she's in that campaign. But that backstory, even as simple as being a champion who will protect their friends while at the same time collecting materials to sew beautiful clothing, that is something that I can use. And so I want all of my players to at least have that commitment to their characters, even if it's a minimal backstory, that I can then use to, again, help to extend the world that they live in, which is exactly what we do as DMs. We extend the world that these characters live in.
Excellent point. We'll at some point be raiding into Lord Gazumba. He's not on yet, so we're just going to keep going because I'm not in a rush.
So then can I throw something out there then?
Absolutely, please.
Fantastic. Because I'm going to use my list that
Okay.
I use. So how do you all deal as your session 0? How do you talk about things like meta knowledge, min-maxing, murder hobos, rules debates, spotlight sharing, etc.?
Ooh. Well, so that's a bunch of different things. I mean, for me, part and parcel of doing a very, very sandbox game is, oh, Lord Gazumba is off tonight for family stuff. Well, hey.
We'll be going for another 6 hours.
Somebody call the food truck. Wait. Ouch. So part of the things, and especially for players who I haven't had play with me before, is the fact that yes, I'm running a sandbox game, and you can do what you like. Actions have consequences, and when I say actions have consequences, I'm not even referring to the point of being punitive either, because the way I run my game from a campaign perspective is the bad guys have a plan. They have their own plans. They have the things that they're doing, and the players get to choose when, if when and where, for the most part, they're going to engage. Occasionally, their antagonists will force their hand by attacking them directly. But for the most part, they have the consequences of their actions or the consequences of their inaction. But if they decide to go on a murder hobo spree, there will be consequences because they can do it as long as they don't get caught. Once they get
There are
caught,
guards in the world, and they can be very many levels higher than those players.
there are guards, there are bounty hunters, there are other adventurers who will hunt them down. They're not going to be, and that's the way the thing works. Min-maxing, I mean, I don't go. Let's put it this way: if they're going to role play it, if they want to min-max, I'm not gonna say don't because there becomes a point where it's like, well, okay, where's the harm if they're if they're tuning their character as much as possible, and that's what they want to do. If that's the kind of character they're going to enjoy, your initial character stats are only going to get you so far. Unless you're playing an edition where you have an actual spec that you're building as you go along, you basically have your feat choices, and even then, you still want to find stuff that's useful. If I'm choosing all things that I find useful, is that min maxing? Maybe. I mean, there's it's one of those things where it's kind of hard to figure out where exactly that line is, so I don't worry about it too much. What were some of the other things that you mentioned?
I talked about like spotlight sharing, murder hobos, which actually chat's been talking about. Rules debates. Oh, rules debates.
Yeah. So spotlight. Well, rules are based on one of the joys of. First of all, I'm normally for like 5e. I'll admit for the most part, with very few exceptions, I'm a raw rules is written person. Just
Yep.
because I be the first to admit I don't know all the rules.
Right.
I can't. I've got addition bleed all over the place. I still have things from 1e that creep in because I can't remember what's where anymore. So I'll look stuff up, and if there's something that doesn't make sense, we'll let it go the first time, and then I'll make a decision on it after the fact. But as far as spotlight sharing, it's a really really good one, and this is something that I have to be mindful of. There are some people who are just naturally quiet, and it's not like it's sometimes it's not even the fact that the spotlight is being taken from them. They're just never going to seek it. So one of the things that I do, because especially because of the fact that I like to run larger parties, especially for my in-person game, is I make sure that I'll ask the direct question: "What are you doing? What's your character feeling? What they're saying?" Or I'll have an NPC just outright address the person to make sure that they're getting that moment. They're having making sure that I put things so that each character has a time to shine. If not, and sometimes it's not even role playing. Sometimes it's just skills. I have one player who, God love him. He's been a friend of mine for 30 years. He's not a role player. He's never going to be a role player. I can squeeze a little bit out of him, but otherwise he's not going to. But give him a bunch of puzzles or a logistical situation to figure out, the man just comes to life, and suddenly there are discussions all over the place. How are we going to figure this out? So throw those in there.
Um,
And I've just been talking for a bit, so Evelyn, would you like to go on that question a bit?
I have nothing
No.
to add.
yeah, and that's the tough side of things, right? Spotlight sharing again, and some of the people in chat have been talking about it. It really comes down to the DM making sure that they bounce around. um I'm a huge I am a huge don't use meta knowledge in the game. You can know stuff without knowing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I I am the first to say in my groups where I'm a player, I'm like, look, and again, I use Taldar as a great example. That man just ran into a beast that killed him, but he ran into it because that's what the character would do and not necessarily what the player would do. And avoiding meta knowledge for me is important. Yes, I don't mind players talking to each other, but if you're 100 yards apart and one player says, hey, don't forget to use blah 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 blah, and the other player's like, oh yeah, that's right, I could use that. It's like, it feels very gamey. And for me, when I play, it's less about the game and more about the story.
Mm-hmm.
Murder hobos, well, as you said, actions have consequences.
Mind you, my very first character ever as an 8-year-old was Thief. Go figure. I was a good
makes,
Catholic school boy.
makes sense.
Oh, but yeah, you was funny. You were talking about the what your character would do. Yeah, I'm reminded of a certain paladin getting carried away by of trying to fly after a dragon who was getting carried away by a tsunami, and the rest of the party was 100 miles behind him at some point. Didn't matter. There was a dragon to be killed. Nothing else mattered. Um,
Oh,
so I do have a question since we have a little bonus time. As a not a let's go to we've been talking about as a DM, as a player, and Evelyn, I'm going to start with you. What do you as a player want out of a session zero?
I want to basically understand what the DM's expectations are. I want to be able to kind of be able to ask any questions that I might have about the content and about my character options might be, and just get to know the other players, especially if I'm coming into a session zero where I don't know any of the other people that I'm playing with. I want to be able to have some time to get to know them and find out, what they are wanting to do, and just learn a little bit more about everybody so that, it makes especially the session one a little more cohesive, and I feel a little more comfortable to engage in RP with them because just being comfortable and understanding that where they're all coming from and stuff, it helps, especially in those first early sessions when we're still getting to know each other. It was very much like that with our Greyhawk cast, since we had not played together before, and I knew John and I knew what to expect from John's DMing style, but getting to know Vivi and Josh and Rory and everyone, it was a very new world, and kind of figuring out what their approach to everything was, and so that was a big part of it for me, for sure, and continues to be a big part of it whenever I play in person and online with anyone. So
Awesome. Terry.
so I've turned into a forever DM other than with John's game. So for
Welcome to the
me,
club. We
for
need to
me,
get
I just,
stickers or
oh,
t-shirts or something.
dude, that would be awesome. Wait, yeah, now I want to design a T-shirt for that. No, I mean, as a player, it's just an understanding among the group more than anything else. I want to make sure that I'm in a group that has similar beliefs as what I have when it comes to playing the game. Because for me, again, I hate to belabor the point, but I do it for the story, either from a player perspective or from the DM perspective. And if I'm in a group who's just there for the combat or just there for the clicky clacks, that's fine for them, but that's not necessarily me. So for me, that session zero is all about making sure that I fit, and notice how I put that, making sure that I fit into the group, not that the group fits to my standards, but it really is about making sure that I fit the group that I'm coming into.
It's a good point, very good point. I was thinking about that. Like, and you mentioned the story. Now, I've always been there for the story, to an extent. The running joke is you've seen on my own stream the story time that they have, and it's because the early adventures, even though I was usually the one running them, the way they grabbed me was the artwork on the front and a little story on the back, and that was what I wanted. I mean, granted, it often one first of all, I was normally one running the game, but it was even when we didn't really have a concept of role playing like we do now. It was the epic story or the mystery or whatever it was. That was what drew me to an adventure. And as time went on, it's to the point now where I could be perfectly happy with no combat. I've run sessions for my players who several of my I'm actually surprised that they've been okay with the fact that we've gone sessions without combat, because that's not what they're used to. But I've managed to get them, I've been lucky enough to manage to get them um, in deep enough where they're interested. Okay, what's happening next? One thing that and in part and parcel because of the fact that been playing a lot of other TTRPGs, basically not what I like to call non D&D adjacent, so not Pathfinder, not Castle and Crusades or something like that, is for as a session zero, going through working through some of the mechanics, doing basically doing a small combat session just to see how things work. So I have a better feel of how does my character. It's a brand new TTRPG to me. I want to know how my character works because sometimes I don't always get that good understanding from the book. Some of them are better than others. Some of them I think the author, it may have made perfect sense in their own head. Didn't come out well on the printed page. So I like during session zero, if it's a new game, have a what do you call it? Have a brief bit of combat, or even just running the skills checks to see how something might work.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's and you're right. I want to know that I'm going to fit in. This is a table that feels good to me. This is a table that I'm okay for this game. I feel that I have something to bring to this table. I want to have I really need to have that good sense from whoever the DM is that I can, the way they tell a story or the way they're going to, the story that they're doing and the way they present it meshes with how I feel comfortable in interacting. Because it's a two-way thing, and you have to go both. Actually, more than that, but let's put it this way, I can have the greatest time with all my fellow players. If the player or the DM and I are not on the same page, it's not going to work. Which is actually mentioned that previous campaign, kind of what happened. We had a great group. I just felt bad because the DM and I, our styles were just not meshing. All right.
No, that's completely agree.
We are it's a little past time. Just checking chat to see if there's anything else.
And just Troll Lords is up, so we could
all right.
read into the Lord of
I'm
Trolls.
gonna raid Chuck.
All right,
but
then.
First, to give Teleadeer 1,000 XP, I just need you to vote for me. Oh, that's
no, wrong stream. Wrong stream.
Is that kind of metagaming? Hold
on. I guess so. Okay.
It's early campaigning. It's
early campaigning.
So next week, when you see Teleadeer do all the amazing things,
don't vote for him. Vote for Laura.
Oh boy! First of all, I want to thank the two of you for joining me tonight. This was a heck of a lot of fun. I'm so glad we had the chance to do this. And it was fantastic getting to spend time with you this weekend. That was a blast. Last year was great. This year, I had the people this year were just absolutely amazing. But before we bring us all to tears, weeping over the fact that it's we have to wait another year for this.
I know, right?
We do have a question.
We do.
Yes, we have a question that we need to ask our audience. So, if you've been enjoying what you've been watching this evening or during the other Blue Box streams, but you're not yet a follower, or you're a follower, but you have not yet subscribed to get access to the awesome emotes, or you are a subscriber and you have let your subscription lapse, we have one question for you here at Blue Box RPG. What are you doing? Give us a follow, give us a sub, or just hang out and chat with us. We love you anyway. Mad Chatters, as always, you brought it. You are amazing, and you are the best community there is. And we had examples of that all weekend long. So have a great night. Have a great rest of your week. And are you all playing on Sunday? I don't. Oh, well, actually, you're not.
Evelyn,
I'm
you
not
playing
playing on
Sunday?
Sunday,
Are you
but
playing
I think we are returning back to the normal schedule next week. I will double check with John, but just
Okay.
keep an eye on our socials because the schedule will go up this weekend. So
And just to throw this in here, 2 weeks from yesterday or from this past Monday, hopefully going to be starting a new campaign over on Machiki D's channel. Monday nights, it's very steampunk based. Evelyn's a participant. Thomas from our Sunday Rune Lords is a participant. And Don from Tales Tavern is a participant. So
Hey.
and then
All right.
possibly we have a fourth little person named Vivi.
We can only hope.
Yeah.
unfortunately, oh, there it is. That's right. Raid.
So come next week for all the funsies. And GHA next week's going to be fantastic when
Yeah.
Kelly Adair gets MVP.
And then promptly die. Well, and then promptly
probably
dies.
dies,
Next
yes.
episode.
That's how it goes. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're gonna go over and raid Trollo Games right now. Chuck is running a game over there, so say hi and send him all of the Blue Box love. We will see you again very soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
And raid is done.
All right, and stream is stopped.